Good afternoon, colleagues, and welcome to the BOR webinar around ending institutionalization and strengthening family and community-based care for children in Europe and beyond. My name is Aaron Greenberg. I am the UNICEF's Regional Advisor, Child Protection. I cover Europe and Central Asia. I am based in Geneva, Switzerland, and it is my honor and privilege to be here today with all of you and to facilitate this event. A few words from my side in the opening to say that we're here for a few reasons, but one of the main reasons is to really take stock of an evaluation that was conducted around Bulgaria's child care reform and deinstitutionalization process, which has received one of the highest honors in UNICEF's evaluation globally, to receive the BOR 2020 Best of Evaluations. Now, bear in mind, UNICEF with governments around the world conducts hundreds of evaluations a year. So this is no small accomplishment. So this evaluation is not only tremendously strong and informative, but it goes well beyond Bulgaria. Deinstitutionalization, indeed childcare reform and social service reform is no longer a debate. It's no longer a debate whether or not large institutions are a good thing or a bad thing for children or even adults. The big question is how to implement a successful reform and what those reform initiatives look like and what we learn from them as we move through them. And what better place to look than Bulgaria? Bulgaria, which had 30,000 children in institutional care some 20 years ago and has advanced significantly over the course of the last 20 years to reduce that number, nearly eliminate it, and has learned a lot of lessons along the way about that process, both institutionally as a government, but also with the many partners that it works with to advance those important reforms. We've learned a lot of things in Bulgaria that have resonance for all of European countries, the neighborhood, and beyond. Important questions are emerging in the reform, important celebrations, but also questions about what worked particularly well and what are the remaining challenges. And so the agenda today will focus on two things. It will focus on Bulgaria and the evaluation and how it's impacted decisions that are currently being made in Bulgaria and feeding into the current and planned reform agenda as it continues in Bulgaria. And it will also look beyond and see what are some of the bigger questions that we need to discuss for Bulgaria, but also broadly in the European Union and beyond in member states around the world as they continue to embark on a very similar set of reforms. And so the agenda will take us through these different components, and we'll have some chances to hear from UNICEF's reflections on some of these complex areas of engagement, as well as recent findings from the Lancet Commission, which looked extensively at deinstitutionalization and childcare reform and some of the learning there. And both of those presentations will be couched in a reflection of Bulgaria and what Bulgaria is going through and what it faces. Given the important dimensions of partnership, we'll have reflections from the European Union, who we know very well has contributed enormous policy and financial energy to the deinstitutionalization and childcare reform agenda within Europe and beyond. And also from Eurochild, who is an important partner across Europe and beyond on child rights issues and child protection. We will end with a discussion and a wrap up, and I will be your facilitator throughout. So please excuse me for any missteps along the way. And I hope that we have a very productive and lively discussion. Before turning to our first panel and introducing them, I'd like to turn quickly to Fabio Sabatini, who is our Global Chief of Evaluation in New York from UNICEF. Fabio, please, the floor is yours for a few minutes and some brief remarks.
Thank you very much, Aaron, and thanks everybody for the invitation. I'm here because many reasons. One, the more formal one is because I'm acting as the director of the evaluation office in headquarters, which is the office that is responsible for corporate evaluations. Also, I am the Chief of Capacity Development in my own unit in the Evaluation Office. So this is very relevant. And perhaps more personally, because I was the Regional Chief of Planning for 15 years in the regional office. So I was associated with at least 3 rounds of government and UNICEF country program development documents. And I've seen the evolution of the work of UNICEF and governments in Southeastern Europe regarding childcare system reform. In fact, one of the things that is important about this evaluation, and I'll come to that other reasons as well, is because this evaluation inspired, as Aaron said, well beyond what is in the evaluation. It inspired a change of mindset, a change of approach in UNICEF globally, from something that we could say is project-based or program-based, whereby UNICEF intervenes in selected and discrete type of activities, to a mindset where UNICEF actually starts thinking about systemic changes. And because Bulgaria, Romania, and other former Central Command economies countries had very strong social economic systems, it was in a way more difficult in these countries to undo some of the difficult systems that were inherited from the previous regime or regimes to the more modern type of work. So, in fact, I would think that the region, the sub-region in particular, Southeastern Europe, has laid the way for UNICEF rethinking its own work, not only in childcare or social welfare, but also in education, in health. And nowadays, we know that, for example, there are issues related to public health, whether it's Ebola or even COVID. And we know that in order to fix that, we don't just need vaccines, which of course are the first line of action, but also we need to strengthen public health systems. And that idea of strengthening systems actually came from Bulgaria and its neighbors. So I'm very proud that this is now recognized, as Aaron said, as one of the best evaluations. In fact, we have about 140 evaluations in UNICEF every year. And this evaluation was chosen for one reason, which is because of influence. Now, 140 evaluations doesn't mean that every evaluation is a strategic evaluation. It doesn't mean that every evaluation is going to be influential. It doesn't even mean that any of these evaluations, all of these evaluations, are being read or used. So the most important thing from an evaluation perspective for us is that not only did this evaluation get used, but also influenced the way a generation, I would say, of thinking around social protection and child protection. I remember that deinstitutionalization was the only talk in town in the 90s, when we were counting how many children were coming in and how many children were going out of the system. Then we started talking about community-based childcare support systems, and we started looking at a situation where more children were in community-based arrangements than in institutions. But we realized that the flow of children into institutional care, or formal care as we call it, was not being reduced. And so we moved from deinstitutionalization to prevention of separation and abandonment, to the rights of children or to a caring environment. So just to say that and to conclude that you should be very proud as a government and as partners that for UNICEF this has been something that has left a legacy that will endure many of the of the other issues that are in more difficult countries where they are faced by children are facing challenges in the systems that are deteriorating in all sectors. So just to conclude that we in UNICEF, particularly in evaluation, we have two reasons for doing evaluations. One is accountability, because we are entrusted with funds and resources for children. So we want to see what works and what doesn't work, but hold ourselves accountable. That's why the evaluation function is independent. But also, and perhaps equally, if not more important, is that we want to have an evaluation that is used for learning. And I think that this evaluation is actually an example of how long-term sustainable learning has occurred, not just only because of this evaluation, but as part of this has contributed definitely to the long-term strategic vision of the government and the sub-region. So that's what I wanted to say, and I'm really keen to hear the further reflections because I've been out of the region for about 5 years now. Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Fabio, for those remarks. Without further ado, I'd like to now move to the first session where we'll hear a bit about the evaluation itself, its findings, the child care reform's main achievements, and some of the lessons learned in Bulgaria. And we will start this session with Elena Atasnova, who is the Child Rights and Monitoring Specialist at Unicef Bulgaria, to walk us through the evaluation. Elena, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Aaron. Good morning and good afternoon. We usually focus on the child's best interest, but today I will also focus on the audience's best interest and try to be very brief in my introduction, as the following discussions are very promising and interesting. Couple of words regarding the national context. As in many countries in the region, and as Aaron already mentioned, Bulgaria inherited in 1989 a huge number of residential institutions, but in the beginning of the transition, children unfortunately were not in the focus on the policies and reforms. Bulgaria started implementing childcare reform much later. It was in the year of 2000, and reducing number of children in institutions was among the key priorities. But despite the progress, Bulgaria for a long time continued to be the country with the highest rate of children in residential care in the Ekaru region. It was about 10 years ago, actually in 2010, when Bulgaria approved the strategic document, Vision for deinstitutionalization of children in Bulgaria. And at that time, there were 137 big residential institutions for children in which were living more than 7,000 children. The evaluated UNICEF project, Family for Every Child, was actually implemented in support of the vision of the action plan to the vision, and in parallel of state initiatives that will be mentioned in the next presentations. You can see at the slides what was the project aim and objectives, but what is important is that the projects evolved over time from a focus on closure of the concrete infant home, in which actually most of the children, some of the institutions were older than 3 years, to an ongoing serving development project that introduced new services based on the identified factors and needs. In terms of the evaluation, as Fabio said, the most important was, on the evaluation was to assess the impacts, and there are many interpretations of impact evaluation, but this evaluation considered the cause and the effect, searching for any effect and not only the one that were initially intended, and also the potential longer-term effects on the intervention. The evaluation methodology employed a mixed methods approach in order to capture a range of perspectives effective and ensured regulation of data, including case files reviews. I will say that there was one key limitation in the evaluations, and this is that interviews with children were not conducted due to low age of children, due to their disabilities, and there was missing data on their well-being in the placement after the infant home was closed. So outcomes for children were moved from the Schumann infant home were not fully studied. However, the transition from a narrow focus on deinstitutionalization to a system approach was sound and evidence-based. This challenge of bringing together social and health focus, and actually as well as other intersectorial functions as education, as social assistance, housing, effectively became an important theme of the new action plan to the government vision. And thus the valuable impact of the evaluation in bringing lessons learned from the Family for Every Child project. As the main emphasis of today's webinar is how we can learn from the evaluation, at the end of my intervention, I will just attract your attention to some key points that were learned during the implementation of the project and also were confirmed in the evaluation findings. The first very important thing is that the placement of small children, the principle of not placing small children in residential care, no matter how good the environment in institution is. Following this principle actually has prolonged the process of closure of the institution, but it was an extremely important battle to win and a good model to present. The other thing was the innovation for Bulgaria at that time, foster care for babies and very young children, which actually had a great impact on the closure of other infant homes in Bulgaria. The other thing was the importance of complex and intersectorial work at community level, not only at national level. Then the other thing was the work with and for children with disabilities, not omitting any of the systems, no matter the issues, whether it's diagnostics, support services, infrastructure, stigmatization, but still there is much to be achieved in this area. The other very important thing was to focus on sustainability and not so much on quick results. And also the importance of interactions between national policies and also EU policies and fundings. So thank you for the attention. I'll be available after that for the discussions and the questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elena. And let's continue immediately this important panel. And we're very lucky to have with us today Ms. Zornista Rusinova, former Minister of Labor and Social Policy and current President of the Economic and Social Council in Bulgaria, someone with firsthand knowledge of these reform efforts. Ms. Rusinova, pleasure to see you again, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to see you. It's a little bit snowing in Sofia today, so we don't feel much of the spring spirit. But anyway, I really thank Unicef for this opportunity to talk about the achievements and what we have built as experience in Bulgaria for closing the institutions and for the big reform that we performed over the last 10 years. And I think this webinar is in a very special momentum for all of us, because you know that just recently the European Commission has promoted the initiative of the Youth Child Guarantee. And this is something that is little by little trying to mobilize more political commitment, more funding, and more public resources for the whole reform for children in Europe. because the closing of institution and change of the social and health and educational care of system are the core of the child guarantee. And I'm very proud that Unicef Bulgaria is one of the pilot countries that would contribute to the implementation of this child guarantee. I would just like to say that this evaluation is also beneficial for us because right now our country is in the next phase of preparation of strategic documents in order to receive European funding. And I think this evaluation would be very beneficial for the national authorities in order to fine-tune some of the ideas that are going to be implemented, because although all the institutions are closed in Bulgaria, the reform is still ongoing and there are still things to be done. I would share with you a brief presentation, but before I start my presentation, I would share with you that the 4 reasons why we can say that the experience of Bulgaria has been quite successful is that first we have established a long-term strategy, which meant that with the vision of the institutionalization of children as a long-term strategy, it has put certain pillars of this reform that were not in the meantime moved or changed or readapted no matter what was the government. The second reason and the second condition is the very clear political government that several governments, no matter of the political affiliation, during all this more than 10 years we had, with very strong political commitment on very high level, with coordination on the level of Deputy Prime Minister all the time. And I think that involved different sectoral ministries, like not only the Ministry of Labor and Social Policy, but also Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Justice, local authorities. The third major and important key factor was the involvement of all stakeholders, government, local authorities as major implementers of the reform, because the services are implemented by local authorities, NGO sectors and media and public opinion that was attracted, which helped us move in one and the same direction all this time. And the fourth factor was the mobilization of adequate financial resources, meaning infrastructure resources, resources for services, national resources, because such a reform is not possible without without funding. I think that with these several slides that I would show you, just a second. I would be able to, just a second, because something happened to my computer. Can you see my presentation, by the way?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Okay, okay. Okay. As I said, our main messages were a clear strategic framework. We have established a long-term strategic plan with, after that, action plans with very strict deadlines, responsibilities, and ways of monitoring the constant implementation, and really very good coordination. A focus of policies on ensuring decent life for every child, and this intersectoral or multisectoral approach that we had, including the integrated social, health, and educational services. I think the other very important decision that was taken more than 10 years ago was not to start with only pilot projects as it was before that, or to test something, or like some other members did. But in this strategic plan, we have decided that we'll close all institutions in Bulgaria. And now, after this 10 years, it's already a fact. We are now in the last phase of the updated second action plan. And the plan itself has a very focused group of 6 types of measures. The emphasis of the last several years, the last part of this plan, was the support of preventive measures, supporting families and children in order to prevent deinstitutionalization and placing children in institution. Now the reduction of number of children in specialized institution is a little bit over 96. The fact is that some of the last infrastructure projects are now in implementations. Most of the institutions are closed, and little by little still there are some children in the baby services between 0 and 3 years that are to be assessed in order how to address the specific services to them, and to close all the services. I would be very frank to say that some of these steps were delayed by COVID because the access to services was very difficult, and the assessments of the health status of children and their social and emotional status was also very difficult. So during COVID times, it's very challenging for social services. That's why some of the actions were a little bit slowed down, but little by little, I think during last summer, and I hope this summer, we'll be able to catch up with the deadlines that we have placed now. Through the implementation of all these years, we have seen very dramatic scale up of the number of services in Bulgaria. And what I can say is that if we look at the map of services right now in Bulgaria, we can say that about 55% of the services are community-based services. They're not residential services, which is a very good way of seeing how the reform is going and how the whole transition is moving. During this last stage of the implementation between 2017-2021 period, we have built 112 new services and different refurbishment of existing services. Besides the Unicef projects, we have a number of different projects and operations that were supported through the regional fund and the European Social Fund. They were mostly to support the services in the period of transition, to support the foster care, to support early childhood development services. This is a new approach that really consists of integrated educational and health and social services. But also we started with new ideas for professional integration of young people in order to support them with vocational qualification or some basic skills in order they to be prepared for real life. Also to find ways how we support talented children that are in social services and give them the opportunity to develop their talents and other initiatives, not only the basic, I would say, package for integrated services. There were many challenges, I would say, in the way. There were a lot of different opinions heard, quite often some difficulties, because as I said, we have involved all stakeholders. So the coordination between all local authorities, all NGO partners, all different ministries, several governments were changed in the meantime, was not an easy task. So the first big challenge is to find and not to lose the focus of the policy, and to have very strong political commitment. To have good partnerships, not only on national level with the big networks for children and our partners as is Unicef, but also to form local partnerships, which was very, very good approach, because we managed to have a bottom-up approach with experienced people from NGOs working on the ground with local authorities, but also international organizations that helped us form the long path and the long strategy. We, in the meantime, had good experience also, because I consider all challenges as good experience with fake news, with attacks by different movements on the different themes, from the rights of children and different targeted DI policy. So I would say that probably one of the weak points that we had in our big process is that we didn't have a very consistent and well-maintained communication strategy. Something was a little bit underestimated by us, but I think that within these last phases we'll be able, and I see that we now have more positive public opinion. And still this reform is to continue. You know that almost 2 years ago the Social Services Act was adopted. And this is the real change of the way social services are changed in Bulgaria. But in order this reform to be complete, there is still a big transition period where we should guarantee that we have high quality of services with well-motivated specialists who are receiving different very decent payments, because this is one of the challenges. And I really believe that all people who are involved in this long way and long strategy think that mission is possible. We think that it is really possible to change the life of children. And as I have many times said, we would be happy to see that the reform is over when we see children that were abandoned, or children that were in a difficult situation. That's why they were placed in a social service, that they play and they study and they have community and social life no different than the other and the rest of the children, and their talents and their achievements are so well attributed as the children that live with their parents. But still we have to struggle with some fears of neighbors, with small communities, and still I think there are a lot of work to be done on community level. Just few words how I can see our role now as an European, as an Economic and Social Council, and my role now in my new position with the this reform. As I've said, this webinar is very timely because of the adopted EU strategy on rights of children and the European Child Guarantee. And in this context, you know that this initiative is part of the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights. And this year we are planning to have an opinion on the first European action plan for the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights. We are working also on a resolution on the partnership agreement of the operational program, because you know that in Bulgaria, this reform is relying on not only national resources, but also European funding. So this focus would be also very important for us. And we are also having an opinion on the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, and in our national aims in the Recovery and Resilience Plan. A big part of it is the investment in education and healthcare, which is a key one for the benefit of children. So I would stop with my presentation now, and I hope that I have answered some of the questions already, but if you have questions, I will be really happy to answer you.
Thank you so much, Zornista, for this presentation and this reflection. Indeed, when you have these fundamental shifts in a system, there are so many positive changes that come from that, but then real challenges and reflections on how to best go forward. Your point about communications, I think, is incredibly valuable because when there are so many structural changes happening in the system, there's so much awareness amongst different communities that needs to be raised about that process. And I think it's an important lesson for us to carry through. Thank you so much. I'd like to turn to our last presenter in this panel, Ms. Dani Coleva, who is the Child Protection Specialist for Unicef in Bulgaria. Dani, the floor is yours. You're muted, Dani, just so you know.
Thank you, Aaron. Yeah, I went straight into presentation. Can you see my screen now?
Let's give it a second. Not yet.
No, I think the screen share stopped, Dani.
Okay, Celeste, can I ask you to take over and to do the presentation, and I'll talk it through.
Let me look one second then.
Okay, I'll start so that we don't waste time, given that we're already behind the schedule. But as you can see, this is the topic which is very much at the heart of what we do, not only in UNICEF, but in partnership with our stakeholders. So I want to start by a saying of a famous Bulgarian writer, Nicolae Haitov, who said, "It's one thing to want to do something, it's another thing to be able to do it, and it's third and fourth to actually do it." And my personal involvement in the childcare reform in Bulgaria started back in 1999, when there were more than 33,000 children in institutions, and Aaron said, more than 150 institutions. And I still remember what these places looked like, what they smelled like, what care was provided for children in them, if this could be called care. And Mrs. Rusinova touched on some of the major challenges from a policy perspective and decision maker. What I'll do is I'll try to focus on the key challenges and lessons learned through this journey which Bulgaria had, which is also linked with, UNICEF Bulgaria and our vision for, the way ahead. So next slide, please. I'm not going to take you through the whole slide, which I hope you can see, but what I would like to highlight is that, a major challenge, which is also linked with, the lessons learned, is that the reduction of number of children in specialized institutions didn't necessarily translate into the reduction of number of children who are going into care. And this is one of the lessons linked. You can see that actually, we need to move from this, focus on deinstitutionalization of children and services, no matter whether this is prevention, reintegration, foster care, etc., to deinstitutionalization of the whole system and deinstitutionalization of, looking at the major causes and the drivers which are behind deinstitutionalization, and these are namely poverty, access to universal services, housing, etc. Some of the things which Mrs. Rusinova also touched on. Another key issue which she talked about is also related to the investment in the human resources, the people who work. And this is a big challenge, again, which is very much linked with the lesson learned, because apart from the need to invest strategically in, the child protection system strengthening, I think Bulgaria is not alone when we talk about, the number of caseload which the social workers are dealing with, the salaries which, they have, the support, their staff turnover, which leads to quality issues, the lack of effective implementation when it comes to, to policy and how this is translated into local action. So in terms of lessons learned, Celeste, please, can I have the next slide? I think the first one, taking it further from, the investment in, preventative and support services, but not only children, but also in parenting and family support. And this is very much linked with, development of nationwide parenting programs, but also linked with review of the narrative we use. Unfortunately, deinstitutionalization, I think, is a challenge for all of us, is still primarily understood as dismantling institutions rather than investing in families, in building secure relationship and trust with responsible adult, which are some of the most important ingredients when it comes to what stays behind quality preventative and alternative care services. One of the things, for example, some of the professionals working in the field are advocating that when we talk about, terms, perhaps we should start talking about prevention of separation from birth parents rather than prevention of abandonment. And as I said, this is all linked with very much, shifting the narrative, the communication strategy, but also looking how this is linked with, creating this enabling environment and addressing the drivers, which I've already spoke. I touched upon the child protection system capacity, but what I think we have as a key lesson learned is that if we really want to have a respected, competent and professional workforce, and this is not only related to social workers, this is also related to people working in social services, the allied sectors. We really need, as Mrs. Rusinova said, a much more systemic approach, a comprehensive strategy which looks at how they are planned, how they are supported and developed, which are the three key pillars behind Unicef framework to support governments and relevant stakeholders in moving this issue forward. And last but not least, there is a clear need for a wider child protection concept, which is focusing on children's rights, prevention, and integration with other sectors and services. And the key word here is integration. This is very much linked with the principles of best interests, but also the necessity and suitability as per the UN alternative care guidelines, which are not fully understood and applied, but it's also not fair to leave them to individual social workers to interpret. And there is a clear need for guidelines, standard operating procedure, how they should be effectively implemented in practice by all the systems and professionals. And when I talk about integration, one of the lessons learned, which we're trying currently also to address, and through the piloting of the Youth Child Guarantee, which Mrs. Rusinova talked about, is this situation where we now have many plans by the different systems, and sometimes it resembles the situation of, the famous fable with the swan, the crab, and the pike, which are all pulling in the different directions. And we really need to move to a plan where we have, to a situation, where we have one plan, one family, one coordinator. Because sometimes even in the child protection system, we have one family with a number of children who are supported, and through different plans, different interventions. But this is going back to the beginning. We really need to move this, conceptually, not only with social workers, but all the other key sectors to achieve this integration. I'll stop here, but I would like to conclude with something which we didn't talk, and I really believe it's crucial if it's about lessons learned, and it's about the political will and the leadership. Mrs. Rusinova talked about the partnerships, but I believe that without the key decision makers who show that this mission is possible and who really, you know, are ready to fight for this cause, we wouldn't be here to share the story of Bulgaria's journey, where we have been, where we are, and where we are, you know, where we want to be, because our journey still continues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danny. And recognizing that we're behind time, I'm encouraging people to continue to write their questions in the question and answer, and we'll reserve those for the very end to redirect to this panel as needed. I'd like to shift now to the next presenter, Stella Grigorish, who works with me in the regional office here in Geneva and is a child care and alternative care and social services specialist. One of the big lessons learned in any reform process around transitioning from large institutions to a diversified family and community-based care system is what is the role of small residential care facilities in that transition? How are they defined? How many of them should there be? Should they exist at all? How are children with disabilities factoring into this equation? And what are we learning from some of that? So Unicef supported the development and led the development of a white paper that examined the role of small-scale residential care for children in the transition from institutional to community-based care in the region. And we thought it would be useful to have a quick reflection on some of the main findings from that. So Stella, the floor is yours for 5 to 7 minutes, 10 maximum if you can.
Okay, thank you very much, Aaron. I understand the issue with the time, so I will try to be very, very, very brief. Just to tell you that we've worked a lot of time to develop this paper, and under the leadership of Aaron, by the way. And because the process for us was very important, we had an external reference group that were made of high-level professionals, you know, across the globe that were working for child protection field, for disability field, and we really wanted to make these two poles because the opinions of at the beginning of the process, the opinions are very like black and white, and we wanted to move these poles more in the middle and have some common definitions, some common agreements on what the small-scale residential care is and how it is used and in what context and what are the characteristics of the small-scale residential care. So that was actually the purpose of the white paper. We really wanted, you know, to provide evidence on how these, you know, facilities work, and to provide some guidance to governments, to UNICEF offices on how and other organizations that will result in that all children grow up in families. The paper also challenges, you know, the status quo, whether a disproportionate number of children with disabilities were left behind in the big facilities, but also in smaller scale residential institutions. The paper recognized the need for the specialized services for the children with complex needs, but at the same time warns against segregated facilities. And also it recognizes that large-scale residential institutions should not exist. So that was actually the context, and I will not talk about this in detail, the context when we started to develop the paper. So basically what we were seeing is that the number of children in institutions were decreasing, but at the same time, very often in many countries, we've seen situations that when these institutions were being replaced with different types of services, but also including small-scale residential institutions. In some countries, these institutions, the facilities were, you know, growing rapidly, and you know, a lot of money has been spent on these institutions, and we were seeing that governments actually were unable to ensure that you know, that all children in their countries can have the opportunity to grow in the families. But also there was a, you know, confusion around the definition of the small group home or small scale residential institutions. Often governments and partners were referring to something that's, you know, as small group home, but in reality that was an institution. So I will touch upon very briefly the main conclusions that we've developed as a group. So first of all, we said that a coherent childcare system should always aim to ensure family care for all children. So that should be the starting point, that all children should have the ability, the opportunity to grow in family care. And that all services that are developed as part of that comprehensive system should, first of all, aim to strengthen families, to prevent unnecessary separation, to provide family-based care for those children who cannot live with their parents, and always prioritize child reintegration and family reunification at any stage of the child's journey in the care system. Another conclusion was that residential care, including those, including small-scale one, is not a suitable permanent environment to place children in. So it's not a home, yeah? So while residential care facilities allow for some opportunities for the children to build relationship, but when they age out, they lose this relationship that are very important for the children. And also it is very important that to realize that small-scale residential facilities, even they are for 4 children, they still deprive children of their fundamental right to live in family environment. So that's why the main conclusion was that that small-scale residential care should only be used as the least detrimental alternative, offering high-quality short-term care until support services are in place for the birth families, for alternative care families, for adoptive families, to meet the needs of these children. So basically, our conclusion was that small group homes or small-scale residential care facilities should be established and is seen as part of the continuum of services that many of our speakers have already referred to. So it should be a needs-led rather than service-led. It has to have a sophisticated system to identify the needs of these children and to identify those children that may benefit from this kind of service at some point in their life, and to have a proper regular assessment and monitoring to ensure that the needs are met, but also the children are returned to the families and the communities. We've seen that societies which have very well-established system use small group home, especially when it is based on young person's own informed decision, and of course when the young person is given the options to choose from a variety of options. And very often it is used also as a shared care resource facility, especially for children or young people with severe disabilities or for children who need palliative care. And also for the societies like Bulgaria, who have been in transition from one system to another system, very often small group homes are used, as in the process, as a transition measure when the institutions are being closed, when the services that are strengthening family are being put in place, when alternative care services are established, and most importantly, when universal services are developed and strengthened, adjusted to meet the needs of the children that are being deinstitutionalized or children who are at risk of being separated from their families. So this is the definition that we came up with. So we were saying that the small group home or small-scale residential care is a public or private registered non-family based arrangement. So we can't call them family type homes or whatever. We've seen different names in different countries in our region. That is providing care to a group of 4 to 6 children. That is staffed by highly trained and salaried carers, and who are applying a key worker system, and which has a very small caregiver-child ratio that allows for individualized attention for each of the child. And that objective of this facility should always be the child reintegration to family or permanent placement into a stable family care environment, like alternative care, adoption, or supported independent living if that's about a young person. So, and very briefly, the characteristics, I have mentioned some of them already. So first of all, the goal should be always reintegration or placement in a permanent family environment. It should be small scale, it should be short term. So that's very important. It should be organized in very small groups with routines that are organized around the child needs. and caters for complex needs and challenging situation of the child, and is very specialized and it's very individualized and intensive as a modality of the provision of care that provides high quality care, applying a care worker system that I've mentioned already, holistic assessment in order to understand the needs and provide, a comprehensive care according to their needs. It's a facility that is integrated in the community. It's important that children and young people are attending mainstream services, education and health. And this, of course, it should provide an environment that's, where children feel safe and secure and supported and able to participate in the daily life. And finally, this is the last slide. I'm sorry for the speed. Yes. So the small group home system should be regulated. And I think this is very important for countries like Bulgaria, who have, developed a number of small group homes as a measure, to dismantle large and awful institutions and place children in safe environments. So first of all, the governments, countries shall decide, or regulate, ensure that children under a certain age are not placed in residential care of any kind, small scale, large scale. The expert group decided on the age of 6, 8. We've seen in many other countries like UK, it's the age of 12, 14. So children below this age are not placed in small group homes. It's very important that governments decide, on the number of these kind of facilities, how many of them should be opened, and that's the one, not only the ones that are needed are opened, and if they are needed, they are strictly regulated in terms of, the care that they provide. It should also, ensure that there is a appropriate ratio on staff members for every child, like for every 3-4 children at any given time. And as I said many times already, that children are prioritized for integration or family-based care. So they are not there for a long time. So it's a very short-term care that provides an opportunity for the professionals to continue to work with the child and the family for reunification or for the child to be placed in permanent alternative care. So I encourage all of you to read this paper. You can find it on our website. It's rich in opinions, and I really hope that it will help Bulgaria, but also countries in the region to continue the reform, because reform has not finished, as Mrs. Rusinova has mentioned. We still have lots of plans to do, including in Bulgaria. So good luck, and thank you very much for this opportunity. Congratulations to Bulgaria for achievements so far in the childcare reform, but also for the openness to continue the reform. That's very important. And for the best evaluation, of course. Aaron, back to you.
Thank you so much, Stella. And colleagues may be interested in why we chose to present this paper. I mean, there's lots to discuss around foster care, reintegration, and community-based support services that have been put in place in Bulgaria. And the reason why we decided to share this is because there continues to be a large discussion and confusion around what does there constitute small-scale residential care that is appropriate and can be used. And there are a lot of varying opinions on this now. And so this white paper was done to explore this question in depth, and we thought was appropriate to share today, given the challenges that Bulgaria has experienced in that phase of the transition. Now I'd like to give the floor to Marianne Bakkersman Kranenberg, and I'm sorry if I've mispronounced in any way any part of your name, from the Lancet Group Commission, to give a presentation on policy and practice recommendations for global, national, and local actors. This is rooted in an important piece of work that was commissioned by the Lancet Group. Marianne, we're very happy to have you here. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you. And thank you for the invitation to present our work here today. I am a professor of child and family studies in Amsterdam, 2,000 kilometers to the west of Bulgaria. And indeed, I have an impossible name that sometimes happens if you marry. The work that I'm going to present today is the work of an international intercontinental group of experts in the field, a Lancet Commission group. And we produced 2 documents, one systematic review of all empirical evidence for the effects of institutionalization and deinstitutionalization, with Marinus van IJzendoorn as lead author, and one on policy and practice recommendations with Philip Goldman as the lead author. And I congratulate Bulgaria and what has been reached already. And I know that you all adhere to the idea of deinstitutionalization. Nevertheless, I hope that my data that I'm going to present are also inspiring to you in a similar way as the developments that are in Bulgaria are inspiring for me. It's not about a few children that we talk. Around 7.5 million of children are living in institutions today. And what is life like in an institution? We did a study in an orphanage here in India with our colleague Femi Juffer, and we did spot observations. That is 1 minute of observation of a particular child every 10 minutes for 5 hours. And then the next day, next child, and so on. And we observed what the target child was involved in. Well, as you see here on the left, 80% of the time there was no interaction. 50% of the time, the child was not involved in any meaningful activity. Only 1% of the time did a caregiver speak to a child, and there was even less opportunity for the child to speak to a caregiver. And here you see the results of living in such conditions. Although there is enough food, nevertheless, weight, height, head circumference, which is an indicator for brain growth, and IQ are all affected, damaged, one might even say, almost 2 standard deviations below the norm, that is stunted growth. 2 standard deviations below the norm for IQ means an average IQ not of 100, but of 70. That is extremely low, bordering on mental retardation. Now, this is an example, but what is the picture if we combine meta-analytically all studies available, all studies on institutionalization and deinstitutionalization? That is more than 300 studies over the past 65 years with more than 100,000 children in more than 60 countries. And here you see the damaging effects, large delays in all domains, especially in growth, head circumference as an indicator of brain growth, and cognition. And even at age 25, the brain shows the long-lasting effects of institutionalization in adoptees, with, importantly, stronger effects linked to longer duration of institutionalization. And that is no wonder. Institutionalized care is a form of structural neglect, not intended, but inevitable. Institutional rearing falls outside the range of environments that we can adapt to. That is due to the institution's organization with its regimented nature, the high child-to-caregiver ratio, multiple shifts and frequent change of caregivers. As a result, children become stunted, mentally delayed and emotionally disturbed. And for older children and handicapped children, we found increases of physical and sexual abuse. Now, COVID does not make things any better. There's more morbidity and mortality of orphans in institutions, but also more potentially institutionalized children due to poverty and the loss of their caregivers, be they their parents or their grandparents. And on the other hand, there's sometimes too rapid deinstitutionalization when the pandemic enters an institution. Children and caregivers are sometimes left alone. So there are more street children and children in abusive families. So in wartime and the pandemics, only families, be they their biological families, extended families, adoptive families, or foster families, are safe havens. For the good news is that children do better in family environments. Now, some people may ask, and that's indeed an important question, how do small group homes do, as Stella just discussed? Small groups, the type that is facilitated by, for instance, SOS villages. From a systems perspective, it's expensive and distracts from and thus delays the transition to family care. It may be, as Stella noted, a temporary solution for a specific group. And last week we did a meta-analysis on all SOS villages research that is available, which is, by the way, only a few studies. And what they show is when we take family-reared children as a baseline, SOS children have delays in mental health and physical growth. with respect to mental health, children in small-scale institutions do better than in typical institutions, but somewhat unexpectedly on physical growth, they do even worse than in children in typical institutions. So there are serious delays in physical growth and also delays in mental health in SOS villages. Family care is the better alternative. For children are remarkable plastic, especially at a younger age. In Mitera in Greece, we saw on average how physical growth went down from birth to 12 months, but then after adoption into a family at 20 months, we see that they caught up and approached the normal curve again. The SD, standard deviation 0, is the normal curve. And that is what is also visible meta-analytically. There's impressive catch-up, but it's not complete. What you see here is around 1 standard deviation catch-up, whereas the delay was in many cases 2 standard deviations. And also the catch-up is less when the children are moved into family care at an older age. So children do need a caregiving environment that cannot be realized in an institution, and we do have to hurry, for longer in institutions is more severe delays and less catch-up. So what is needed? At a national level, we need national policies, legislations, and regulations that promote support and resource family-based care for children and family strengthening while progressively transforming their care systems and eliminating the role of institutions. The goal of reform is to ensure that national policies promote increased access to high-quality programs and services that address the drivers of institutionalization and support the placement of children in safe and nurturing families. And I'm not going to read out all elements of this table, but I do wanted to bring it to your attention should you choose to read our research. The goal of this table is to suggest ways that governments can move forward to implement policies that seek to strengthen families and to reduce the risk of separation. For the desired system outcomes are that children achieve the right to a safe and nurturing family, that children reach age-appropriate developmental milestones, that fewer children are at risk of violence and abuse, and improved fiscal efficiency and resources directed to effective programs. The Commission dove into the elements of what makes an effective care system. And this means looking at 6 areas in tandem: policies, legislation and regulation, evidence and data for decision-making, government structures, that is, functions with clearly defined roles, engaging communities and fiscal management and resource allocations, and the continuum of care that Stella also referred to. Sometimes it is easy to reduce all of this down to a single goal, and the Commission suggests this one: the number of children who enter institutions should progressively be brought to 0. And that goal can be achieved by first addressing the drivers of institutionalization. So identifying the families who are most vulnerable to the circumstances that lead to separation and supporting these families at mitigating risks. And social policy should thus focus on prevention of separation, transition of institutions, and preparing children and families when a child is placed from an institution into a home, into family care. And if you look at what we call the continuum of care, we suggest that all elements move towards the box on the left, a safe and nurturing birth family wherever possible. And small groups homes are only for specialized groups and only for very temporary living for children. And that is where I come to my conclusion. What is needed for safe child development? What are the lessons learned from all these studies on deinstitutionalization, institutionalization that are relevant for policy? First, social interactions are the motor of development. Not food, but the innate bias to seek comfort with protective caregivers is essential. Second, continuity of caregiving arrangements. Prevention of fragmented care. Some children in institutions have seen more than 40 caregivers before they have their 3rd birthday, and prevention of breaking of bonds. And 3rd, a network of attachment relationships is needed, both for the child and for the caregivers to fall back upon. Support for caregivers in family care, be they the biological, foster or adoptive parents, is the backbone of deinstitutionalization. I thank you, and here is the slide that also presents the links to the materials that my lecture was based upon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marianne, for that presentation of the important evidence which continues to build over now well over a century, and the Lancet's efforts to further capture, synthesize, and add to that evidence is timely and helpful. I think one thing that is abundantly clear is that when governments and communities are transitioning from one system to another system, that this inevitably takes time, and that there may be steps needed in the interim to get us to the end point, but that end point, as we see in many highly developed systems, is still not reached. So even in communities which have resources and traditions of investing in social services at decentralized level, place where I'm from, New York City, continues to struggle with a balance of investing a limited set of resources on a diversified care system, struggles with new social and economic pandemics that afflict communities, whether it's COVID-19 or methamphetamine use or alcoholism and other things that arrive and change the driving factors of family separation. Discrimination.
I absolutely agree. Yeah, so the focus on prevention that I heard earlier this afternoon is extremely important in my perspective.
Thank you again for your valuable presentation and for the Lancet's contribution. I'd now like to turn to our final panel, which is a reflection panel. And the first person to speak on the reflection panel is someone who I've grown to know fairly well over the years, Marie-Anne Paraskevas, who's Senior Policy Officer at DG Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion in the European Commission. Marie-Anne Paraskevas has been and continues to be a champion for supporting EU policies that can help to advance this important work, both within the EU and beyond. Marie-Anne Paraskevas, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Aaron, for the kind words, and thank you for asking me to participate in this expert panel. I'm not an expert like you are. I'm an expert by experience. I started working on the issue of children in 1995 when I was in the Gender Equality Unit, and I was working at the time on reconciliation of work and family, but still we had a very advanced, let's say, approach to children and to families and the role they play in the development of the children. And all those years of, in one respect or another, I have been involved in this issue. I would like to reflect on some issues that were already discussed. I'm not going to repeat what is acknowledged by everybody today, but I do think that prevention is the key. It is better to work in advance and to prevent institutionalization of children and segregation instead of trying to afterwards remedy to the mistakes that we have done. And in this respect, I would like to raise the issue of the need for more awareness raising, even with parents. We see very often that, especially when it comes to parents of children with intellectual disabilities, that are more difficult to tackle and also to be endorsed by the environment. The first and the easiest solution is to take the child into institutional care because according to what the experts say or according to the views of the parents, this is the best way forward for the children, but it's not. once your child is in an institution, it will be very hard afterwards to find its way in the mainstream society. And this starts for the need for more inclusive education. It is unacceptable that in a country like Belgium, you have 8 different categories for schools, for children with Asperger's, children with dyslexia, children with dyspraxia, whatever. And it's a struggle for a parent to be able to find support in the mainstream education for a child with a disability. So this is a first step that we need to advance. The second issue is the issue of awareness raising with the workforce that is working in institutional care, because they are very much afraid that when closing an institution, then their job will be lost. It will not be lost. The only thing will change is the way the service is delivered. And I think that through the EU funds, we managed over the last 20 years to do major reforms in the way social care is delivered, not only for children, but all the other groups that are concerned with this deinstitutionalization. And here as well, I go back to what was said this morning. It is not only about the legal framework, it's about policy choices. And there the political will and the political commitment is very, very, very important. It's not about whether an institution with 100 people is eligible, it is whether we want to go forward with that. And size is not at all matters, because even within a family, you can have an institutionalized mentality. The second issue I would like to raise is the issue of sustainability. And here comes the issue also of responsibility. In many of the countries where the institutionalization is one of the key priority areas in terms of the EU funding, the transition risks to being perceived as an EU-funded project. And once the funding from the EU is finished, then the whole thing collapses. And this is where, you know, the national level should come in, and awareness raising is needed in order to be able to scale up whatever has been achieved through national or other budgets apart from the EU funding. It is very hard to see that many projects that have been put in place with EU funds, in particular the European Social Fund, collapsed once the support from the EU stopped. And linked to that is the issue of partnership. Nothing can be achieved if there is not a very strong partnership with the national, the local, the regional level, but also with all those organizations that are working on the ground. It is very, very important to have the support of all those organizations, that they know their, what are the needs on the ground, and they want to go forward and to support the reforms, and also provide the necessary training and the acquisition of skills and competences for the workforce that is going to be involved. The child guarantee that has been adopted recently, it's also a great success, and both UNICEF and Eurochild and Save the Children and many other organizations have been very much involved in this area. However, it should not remain, let's say, a one-off event. There was a lot of campaigning and a lot of media attention, especially because the adoption of the child guarantee coincided also with a new EU strategy on the rights of the child. But we should not leave it there, and we should try to make the best also under the European Social Fund Plus and the thematic concentration focusing on children in needs. And here I have to say that we were a bit disappointed, because we as a service, we thought that it would have been good to strive for having this as let's say, an obligation for all member states, that the 5% of ESF plus resources at national level should not be only for those countries where there is a challenge on child poverty, because we know very well that all member states have a challenge on child poverty, depending on the different groups. Even in Sweden, we know very well that migrant children are the ones who need further support. So for us, it was a bit of a, let's say, deception that we did not manage to get through with it. But what we are trying now to build on is to have structural changes and reforms coming up, even if the EU money that have been brought into it through the ESF Plus are a drop in the ocean, and there will be need from a lot of co-financing coming from the national budget and from other levels. One other challenge that we need to tackle currently is the fact that with the bulk of money that comes in with the Recovery and Resilience Facility, there is a lot of temptation from many member states to invest again in large institutions and segregated institutions. And there, again, we need to be able to tackle this issue and continue to have the line to take that no more institutionalization, especially for children, more focus on prevention and on support to the families and to the caregivers in order to be able to maintain children within their natural environment and allow them to grow up under the same conditions as all children. So that's, some reflection from my side, and happy also to contribute further to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Marianne, for that reflection. So much to take away, but I think the major one for the 70 plus participants today listening to this webinar is that this is a shared agenda across high income, middle income, low income countries. This is not an agenda which is a finished agenda in a place like Belgium or even Sweden. And I think that's such an important reflection. And this question of national resources, I mean, this keeps popping up for me as well. And I know it's more complex than what I'm about to say, but one of the simplest, straightforward requests of government is to ensure that all of the money they're spending on institutions that they are reforming, if they are, and they should be, needs to be redirected to support the expansion of family and community-based services, because the amount of money that's spent on these large institutions, even the smaller ones, is enormous. And it's something that we can measure at least and point to, even though we know that much more is needed. Thank you so much for those reflections, Marianne. Appreciate you being with us today. I'd like to now hand to our second expert reflector, Jana Hainsworth. Jana is the head of Eurochild and co-chair of the European Expert Group on the transition from institutional to family and community-based care. And I should say Secretary General of Eurochild, a partner to Unicef, and also a friend. Jana, please, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Aaron. Yeah, I mean, I'm honoured this afternoon to be speaking here, not only on behalf of Eurochild, but also on behalf of the European Expert Group on transition from institutional to community-based care, which we celebrated our 10-year anniversary in January of last year. I think it was one of the last major in-person events that we could enjoy together. But I think we can't underestimate the importance and the inspired decision to come together as a real broad coalition and community of stakeholders representing the interests and the voices of all vulnerable groups of people who have and are continuing to be institutionalized, and making that very common narrative that living a life in dignity is incompatible with living in an institution. And that coming together of that coalition has been incredibly powerful, common voice. And I think we've collectively managed to maintain a lot of pressure on driving reform. That said, what we also delivered last January was a report which is showing that there are still over 1 million people living in institutions across Europe, that figure actually hasn't dramatically changed over the years. For children, we are seeing reduced numbers of children in residential care, but we're not seeing reduced numbers of children going into the care system And of course, as you've pointed out, some of those alternative replacement care offers are not good quality and not doing a service and respecting the rights and well-being of children. But I think it's just important that we are a very wide community committed to ending institutional care, and we remain strong and united in putting that pressure at EU level, but also within all countries. And as you say, moving away from this being seen as a problem of Central and Eastern Europe or former communists. It's really a problem that exists everywhere. And in the most developed system have all areas that they can improve upon. The second thing I would say, I mean, clearly I'm coming from a civil society background. It's been mentioned many times, the importance of engaging all stakeholders. It's a very wide community, that expertise on the ground. It's really important that we don't all agree, because actually if we agreed, we're doing something wrong. But that doesn't mean that we should be just steamrolling through and imposing decisions. We need to really engage with civil society. And reflecting on the future, I think one of the areas it's really important that we expand and we build is the voices of children, young people. So really supporting care leaver associations, that voice of children, and parental advocacy groups. I think that's an area which is really what we need to focus on, is that shift of power balance in our systems, so that services become responsive to the beneficiaries, the people that they aim to serve. And how can we do that? Only by supporting the agency of the people who are benefiting and need to shape those services so that they will respond to their needs. And there's lots of opportunity that we have now on the cusp of the delivery of this new 7-year EU budget. Not only the child guarantee, I'll come to that, I think it's a very important policy initiative, but across the board, the areas of Roma inclusion, the European disability strategy, the anti-racism narrative, this is all setting an agenda for investing in non-discrimination, equal opportunities, social inclusion, and shifting into how do we build inclusive societies that serve all. What we're hearing from our membership, and it's broad in Bulgaria, and I think echoes much what Danny has been saying, but it's just there's not enough is being done to serve and support families in adversity. I think we're really haven't talked enough about how we are dealing with the effects of the pandemic, how we will build that recovery to be supportive of the most vulnerable. I think we're all aiming towards not separating families, supporting reintegration of children with their families, but some families are really struggling. They're very much those who are on the threshold of poverty, now have no income. There's lots of support that needs to wrap around families and communities so that they can be autonomous and supportive. And I think that how we then deploy the new initiative of the child guarantee will be really, really crucial. Going forward, I'm really happy that we've talked a lot about the ownership and the political will at national level, the need for strategies. The child guarantee explicitly, if it's adopted how it looks now as the proposal from the Commission, which we appreciate, and it takes on board a lot of the demands that we were making, that needs then to be adopted by the Council in June. But then translating that into national action plans will be really the crucial part of the success story, how it's owned by the national governments, so that it's not sitting aside, as Mariana Pareskevas referred to, is that this is not an EU-driven process. This is an EU support and catalyst, but it has to be a nationally owned process. What we think would help is much better data collection and much better monitoring systems. And we're very excited to be partnering with you in Unicef to be looking at that mapping of what data exists on child protection systems, and actually we're quite excited because from the officially published data, it would be possible to look at a big picture of, you know, how many children are in care, what types of care, what happens to them. Those sorts of things would be very, very valuable to be able to have a better monitoring framework and maintain that level of transparency in systems change and reform. So we're on the cusp of a very promising period. Just making the connection with Bulgaria, because Bulgaria has been on this very accelerated change period and the EU has played an important role, it's often rolled out as the poster child. And it's a bit unfair sometimes because it's there is so much, so it's either seen in a very good light or a very negative light. And I think what we've heard, and I think this evaluation feeds into, is that there are just really important lessons to be learned. And as long as we go in there with an open mind saying, you know, everybody has something to learn, then we can really unpack the experience in a very positive way for the future.
Thank you so much, Jana, for those reflections, and to Marianne for hers. Again, very helpful. I think, you know, one of the things I've experienced in my career working with governments, both within government in my hometown, in my home country, in the United States, but also working with governments around the world on childcare reform, is that when you get through a big reform movement in a period, there is a temptation to just take a deep breath and say, okay, we're done for now, right? Like we've just gone through this big process. Like, can we just see and just step back? And there's a temptation to say we are done with this reform. And the truth is that's far from the truth. And the reforms need to continue. And a continuous evaluation of a care system and the needs and the prevention elements is an ongoing process. It never ends. It is not as easy perhaps as solving malaria or other major public health and public crises. And for those reasons requires our continued attention and diligence. Thank you for raising all those points. Colleagues, I am well aware that we are now officially out of time. I'm also very impressed with this question and answer function. It never ceases to amaze me how the new era of Zoom allows us to simultaneously have a number of conversations. So there has been an ongoing questions and answers. 8 have been answered. We have a few that are open and remaining, but I see that even those are being spoken to as we speak, with people typing responses to some of the questions. And I do also want to honor people's time. And I know people put aside an hour and a half, and now we're at an hour and a half plus 4 minutes. So without opening up too much, I just want to make sure that people had the opportunity to raise questions in the chat box, and to see if folks can stay with us for a few more minutes and see if there are any burning questions from participants. And I say burning only because I want to honor time, which I didn't do very well as a facilitator, which led us to this point, but you'll forgive me. And I will see if anyone would like to come in with an additional question or comment. But again, I'm really happy to see that a lot of these questions, very good questions, were asked during the discussions and presentations and responded to, at least the majority of them. So colleagues, I will then move towards closure, if you will allow me, with the final questions that are in the chat box being answered as we close. I want to thank all of you for being here today. And rest assured that this webinar will be shared widely, and that we will do our best to take all of this information forward into conversations, whether it's with the Committee on the Rights of the Child, whether it's with the European Union, our continued dialogue with them. And when I say we, I mean the collective we. And I also really note that we had a lot of participation from Unicef and other organizations from across this region. including in Central Asia, and where the numbers continue to be quite high. In Kazakhstan, 50,000 plus children in institutional care, with reforms still desperately needed. And a lot of the learning that has been happening in and around Europe over the past couple of decades provides some important tips and suggestions on how the process can be managed better or worse, and where some of the key decision moments and points will be. So with that, colleagues, a big thank you and warm wishes for a good evening ahead wherever you are. And I hope to see you all again soon in one shape or form. Thank you very much.